Michael Burry, in his famous book about the Third Reich, asks an interesting question. Who was Hitler's archenemy? And in this video, I am going to answer two questions. Who was Hitler's archenemy? What is the country that Hitler hated the most and treated the worst under Nazi occupation? And are those actually the same country? Or are we talking about two different countries? So let me start with the question, who was Hitler's archenemy? Well, according to Michael Bullray, it was actually France. Yeah, one could also make the case that it was the Soviet Union, but let me first explain why a thesis that claims that it was France also actually makes quite a lot of sense. So, ever since the Middle Ages, Germany and France were in some kind of conflict. Ever since the Italian wars in the late 15th century happened, France was in fear of the Holy Roman Empire conquering them and crushing them. And Hitler, when France declared war on them after they attacked Poland, was outraged, and he said that he blames France, the country of France, for World War II, that it is all their fault, that this war did not need to happen if it wasn't for the French. That was his propaganda. And he also said that once the war is over, he will return France back to their historical medieval borders, which is what you can see on this map. But he still needed to use them against Stalin, against Bolshevism, in his attack on the Soviet Union, so he did not treat them as bad as he maybe wanted to. So he had plans for later, when he's finished with the Soviet Union. But, okay, let me now explain Bullray's case that actually France was Hitler's archenemy. Well, the French were supposed to be the strongest military in the world. Nobody expected a quick fall of France, especially not Stalin. But yes, so since the medieval times, these two countries are in constant war with each other. Then in the 30 Years' War, France, although they are a Catholic country, they side with the Protestants in order to prevent the unification of the Holy Roman Empire. You could say they betray their Catholic friends in order to prevent Germany from unifying. But then, what's also interesting, Napoleonic conquests actually start German nationalism in a modern sense of the word. So, German nationalism, most historians agree, for example, Hobsbawm and many others, that German nationalism in a modern sense is a product of French aggression, of Napoleon conquering them. Then during World War I, obviously, a lot of blood is spilled between the two communities. The French never fully recovered from their psychological trauma of the Battle of Verdun. And George Clemenceau, the French Prime Minister, who somehow managed to win World War I, even asked to be buried in a way that he looks at Germany, at his arch enemy. When France won in World War I, Clemenceau actually started to cry from joy, and he even had a mental breakdown because he just couldn't believe that finally Germany has been defeated. But as I already said, Hitler realized he needs the French to fight against communism, which is why some Nazi generals and propagandists started with this propaganda that claimed that now all Europeans need to unite against Asian Bolshevism. Mussolini believed in that propaganda. Hitler, well, not so much, but some of his generals did, because for Hitler it was all about just German domination. Hitler was against the idea of a fascist international that some people wanted. Some of his generals, Mussolini and Franco, were also more inclined to accept the idea of a fascist international, but Hitler was too racist to accept it. But okay, the French, although they were treated quite brutally, sometimes as vengeance for their resistance, Nazis would demolish entire cities and villages, but due to Hitler's racism, they were still treated better than Slavic people and Eastern Europeans generally. So yeah, interestingly then, if they were his arch enemies, they were still treated better than the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Greeks even. But okay, now let me first start with an interesting piece of data. Bolray also asks the question, which territories were treated the best under Nazi occupation? And the answer is quite surprising: the Channel Islands, the only parts of the British Empire that Hitler occupied. They were treated quite well, although if you were Jewish, you were still going to die. But Bolray even mentions that some German captains on those islands even said to their men not to steal flowers from the gardens. And Hitler saw the British as racially superior to most other people. He saw them as racially equal to Germany, and he admired the British Empire, their imperialism. Actually, he admired how successful they were. And Göring even said in in conversation with some British generals, "Why can't you just let us have an empire? We just want to have an empire like you." But okay, I would still argue that the German Empire was way more evil than the British Empire. And yeah, the Channel Islands, they had some conflicts with British commandos, but they did not have large battles on them, like like Stalingrad, or not even Stalingrad, even Balkan countries, like the Battle of Sutjeska in Yugoslavia. Stuff like that never happened on the Channel Islands, so they were probably the best place to be if you were a German soldier or a civilian that happened to live under Nazi Germany in that war. So Bolray then goes on to say that the Balkan region was, one could say, the region that was in between of two approaches. One approach was to be, relatively speaking, humane towards the people that you conquered, like in France, in the Channel Islands. Then the Balkan region is when madness starts to appear, when laws of morality and the Geneva Convention starts to break. But also it's not quite the like the just bloodbath of the Eastern Front. And interestingly, most people that died in Yugoslavia died as a result of the civil war between Ustaše, Croatian fascists, and Chetniks, one could say Serbian fascists, although their ideology is a bit more complicated. They claimed to be anti-fascist while they collaborated with Germans and killed quite a lot of Croatian and Muslim civilians. And big battles in Yugoslavia also happened, like the Battle of Sutjeska, for example. Here you can see the monument to that famous battle between the communists and the Germans, the Chetniks, and the Croatian fascists. So that is one of those mythological battles that happened in Yugoslavia. And yeah, so still today the monument for the Battle of Sutjeska stands. Germans, they actually did end up killing quite a lot of people in the bombardment of Belgrade. They disliked the Serbs simply for the fact that Germans and Serbs were at opposite sides in World War I, but the genocide of Serbs done by the Croatian fascists was never ordered by Hitler. Hitler just demanded from them to kill the Jews and the Gypsies, while he was indifferent towards the genocide of Serbs. And even some German generals were trying to stop it. And on the other hand, the hatred that existed between Chetniks and Muslims also, one could argue, goes back to the Ottoman occupation of Serbia. So it had nothing to do with Hitler, really. And this is how the independent state of Croatia looked like, although it wasn't really independent. It was economically controlled, at least economically, by Hitler. But okay, one could also argue that the communists were Hitler's archenemy, simply because fascism even comes into existence as a reaction to communism out of, one could say, fear of communism spreading. Fascism is a reactionary ideology that tries to stop it and replace their populist message with something else, with loyalty towards the nation, or towards your blood, or towards your race, as Hitler would say. And okay, it's not a wrong answer to say that the Soviet Union ended up being Hitler's archenemy. After all, 70% of the German military did fight on the Eastern Front, and Soviet Union did end up defeating Hitler, although they weren't alone. But yeah, without them, I don't think that the war against Hitler would have been won. But there is also a different way of answering this question: who was his archenemy? It is not necessarily the country that killed the highest amount of Germans, nor the country in which Hitler killed most people. We can also just look at the percentage. Although Hitler did kill quite a lot of Soviets, like just in 1941 he killed 2 million Soviet prisoners of war. But yeah, there is one country that I would here agree with Burley that one could argue was hated even more than the Soviet Union by Hitler, and that was Poland. Yeah, so why Poland? Well, there are many reasons for why Hitler hated Poland. So Poland as a country, it comes into existence after the Treaty of Versailles, and Hitler therefore saw Poland as an artificial country created by the French in order to weaken Germany. Hitler used to call Poland the bastard of Versailles. That is one reason for why he hated Poland. The other reason was that Germany and Poland were in some sort of conflict for almost 200 years, or I should say Polish nationalism and German nationalism were in some sort of conflict for almost 200 years. Also, a lot of Jews lived in Poland, and Hitler exterminated them. Hitler also saw Poles as racially inferior, and Himmler even went as far as to say that Germans 3000 years ago lived in Poland, and that Poland is like this ancient fatherland of the Germans. And also a forgotten incident happened in Poland that also made Germany hate Poland even more. So in Nazi propaganda, that event is called the Bloody Sunday. What happened? So as the Polish troops were retreating after Hitler's attack on them, some German citizens of Poland, so the citizens of Poland who happened to be ethnically Germans, decided to betray their country, and they began to fight for Hitler, and they attacked Polish military with snipers from behind their lines. And then the Polish military, as vengeance, killed somewhere around 300 Germans in their country. And the Nazis called that event Bloody Sunday. And Hitler later claimed that the Poles killed 58,000 Germans, and he called for vengeance. And yeah, that was also one of the reasons for why Hitler hated Poland so much. After all, World War II did begin over Poland. And the Nazis, in the beginning at least, decided to use conflicts between Ukrainians and Poles. So they appointed the Ukrainians on higher positions in, for example, the police, in order to control some regions of Poland. But with Bandera trying to declare the independent state of Ukraine, Hitler actually realized that Ukrainian nationalism is not useful to him, that it actually might be a problem, because he was not ready to give a state to the Ukrainians, and because he saw them as just racially inferior, and because of it most Ukrainians ended up fighting against Hitler. But yeah, there was also that crazy element that Himmler kind of imagined. Himmler imagined this idea that ancient Germans lived in Poland like for a long time, yeah, like before even anybody else was there, like 3,000 years ago. And in historical literature, that is called the Teutonic myth. And Himmler was obsessed with finding Germans all around the world. There are archaeological data that indicates that there are Germans all around the world. And yeah, I mean, when it comes to the craziest ideas in Nazi ideology, the chances are 99% that Himmler came up with them. He also came up with this idea that a nomadic cattle herding people of Gorlani, who happened to live in Poland and who happened to be, let's say, discriminated often by the Poles, Himmler came up with the idea that they are actually descendants of ancient Germans and that they should all join the Wehrmacht because they have a strong blood connection with the Germans. But that propaganda was never accepted, neither really by most Germans nor by the Gorlani people. But yeah, so in conclusion, I actually agree with Burley that one could say that Poland was a country that Hitler hated the most, and that Poland was the country that Hitler treated the worst. When you look at the percentage of people killed in Poland, and France could be seen as Hitler's arch enemy, while the Soviet Union is the country that ended up defeating Hitler. And if you disagree with me, tell me in the comment section, and like, share and subscribe for more videos like this.